I think what people are begging for is honesty. They want authenticity. Like without going real dark, but I'll say they got what they got out of Donald Trump. He was never fooling anybody. Doug Ford, Rob Ford before him, Rob Ford, the original Donald Trump before him, right? The mayor of one of the most progressive cities in the country, was authentic. Mm-hmm. We sometimes lack our authenticity by using this outdated model of real shiny messaging. I have the deep privilege and honor of being from Hamilton Center, where if I get too cute by stuff, my people right here in my community will call bullshit in a minute. And they're outraged. And if they saw me being cute, when I see other politicians being cute with the high fives, the backslapping, what it tells me is they're not actually in proximity to misery, that they're not seeing the suffering of their communities. Because if they saw that shit, they'd cut it out and they'd get real with you.
All right, why don't you give everyone a quick introduction to yourself and what you do?
Yeah, man. My name is Matthew Green. I'm the very proud MP from right here in Hamilton Center, Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe territory, governed by the dish with one spoon. On the Between the Lakes Purchase, I am here in solidarity with the 1492 land defenders who are going on close to a year of reclamation on their territories under the Haldeman Tract Agreement.
That's got to be one of the more badass intros I think anyone's done. It's like no one's incorporated land back into their introduction. That's fucking fire. Yeah.
Stay tuned for tomorrow. Your first scoop. Stay tuned for tomorrow because there's going to be some announcements coming out of 6.
Oh, no way. Awesome. So how did you first get involved in politics?
Just watching things in my neighborhood that I didn't like and knowing that people were making decisions that didn't live there. And I was certainly coming from an extra parliamentary and extra political position of activism. And I realized like a lot of our work was just trying to keep up and catch up to the inside information and knowledge that elected officials had that we just weren't privy to. And when you get to know the systems on how they are used to frustrate and politically estrange people, you just get to a point where you're tired of asking people to do the right thing. And you recognize that you need to kind of insert yourself at that table. So I ran municipally in 2014 and was successfully elected to be the city councilor representing Ward 3. Shout out to Ward 3 right here in Hamilton. I always say like my neighborhood in Ward 3 is what Hamilton is to the rest of the country. So when you drive over the Skyway, you see the smokestacks, it's the lunch bucket, it's the Thai cats, it's a lot of things, and it's beautiful, and it's home. So here we are.
Why the NDP?
I'm a new Democrat. I didn't see myself reflected in partisan politics, which is why I ran municipally. I ran against an NDP candidate in 2014, when I was told, oh, you seem like a good guy. You should just run for school board trustee and work your way up. And I was like, no, I'm not waiting. I'm not taking the sidelines for this one. So I ran against, Sheila Copps' former chief of staff, the NDP machine, and all these other people. And we just utilized campaign activism that we had used from issue-based campaigns, kind of a, decentralized snowflake model, a GANS model of organizing. And we just outworked everybody and started a new type of politic. I should say reintroduced a kind of politic in Hamilton that had been present but had kind of begun to drift away. So we brought it back in.
Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by a new politic, and I guess maybe also inject the idea of leftism inside a political space? Because I know a lot of our American viewers, for example, they were really energized by, say, like Bernie Sanders, AOC, people who are like, social democrats, but they're also operating within the democratic space or landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I think our politics come to us honestly in Hamilton Center. It's a survival. It's not a theory. It's not it's not an 18th century text that we've read and written. It's being in proximity to misery and suffering and resilience and mutual aid and community care by virtue of our survival. And so there is a very practical way in which when you're from Hamilton, you just learn to take care of each other, whether it's in your neighborhoods, probably starts off on your street with the kids you grow up with, knowing that, some of your close friends are going to school, they're not eating, knowing that there's, bad situations that people are having to face every day, and wanting to do something about it. And so I think growing up in Hamilton is a process of confronting fundamental experiences of fairness, or I should say lack of fairness and justice, and demanding to see something better out of our communities, right? So I come to maybe my economic theory later in life of just being left out of an economy, and having to start my own business because I just didn't really feel like I fit into the opportunities that were here. And I didn't really feel employable, quite frankly, just because I didn't seem to fit these workplace cultures that I was trying to insert myself in to get by, right? Because you're told you go to university, you get that good job, and you come out and it's the Canadian dream. Everything's there for you. And then when you get out and you recognize that is
I'm saddled with debt. What is all this debt? Like, how do I get rid of this debt?
Right.
Get a better job.
We need 5 years experience for an entry-level job. We need
how do I get experience? Well, go volunteer. Yeah. Volunteer when you have crushing debt. How about that too?
Totally. So yeah, I shared the experience of having a mentor and a guy by the name of Michael Leachin, who is one of Canada's biggest billionaires, and wanting to go to AIC and like seeing this pathway kind of out of working middle class or lower income middle class upbringing, right? And when you're young, you kind of idealize that, and then you get close to it and you realize, like, not only is this a bit of a fraud, but this is a bygone era that is gone. And I got a job at a bank when I got back from university, mostly because I just wanted to get those hours and then do other things. But I don't share this story often, but I'll share with you that I had a close friend, a roommate in university who had gotten leukemia, Kristen Pipe. Shout out to K-Dog. And he passed away. And I'll never forget on a Friday, knowing that I was going to have to pack up and go to Montreal and working this bullshit job as a bank teller, and having somebody who wasn't even the assistant manager basically tell me that I can't leave because somebody else had made a mistake on my till in doing a transaction.
Shit.
Knowing that the banks wanted you there at 8:30 to start paying you at 9, wanted you clocking out at 4:30 but staying till 5. And I just remember walking out of that place and knowing that I'd never go back, and just thinking about how morally corrupt it was that they were paying us, basically minimum wage while raking in those profits, and kind of swearing that off, right? Like being like, that is not for me. And then starting my own business, which happened to be fitness, which then, of course, led me to Six Nations during their first reclamation in 2006, when I was invited to go out there and deliver some programs and services.
Can you talk a little bit about that for people who might not know?
Yeah, so, there's been an ongoing encroachment on treaty territories known as the Haldimand Tract, which is from lake to lake, 6 miles on either side of the Grand River from the foot to the mouth. And the agreement was, like, the Six Nations, the Haudenosaunee, were allies to the British Crown during, our wars with the United States of America and French, right? Like, and France. And so,
I was going to say they were allies with both, right?
They were.
Yeah.
I mean, without the Haudenosaunee, we would be likely French Americans in a very odd twist, right? And so they were granted 6 miles on either side of the Grand, acknowledging the way in which they contributed to the defense of British North America. And over the years, like, that was like, I think 900,000 acres. And over the years, they've been whittled down in their claims to a very small reserve territory, or a few reserve territories across southern Ontario, but that their traditional treaty territories have been developed on and squatted on and dispossessed from future generations of Indigenous people. And so when developments would begin to encroach on the Indian Act reserve of Six Nations territory of the Grand River, they started to push back, because those were properties, those were lands that were already being disputed in the federal courts as being treaty territories. So, I was a city councilor for a long time, and I want to give viewers the understanding that if you've ever lived in a city setting, or even if you're a rural farmer out there, you'll know that fence lines are a very particular thing with your neighbors. If you came home and your neighbor moved their fence a foot onto your property, that is instant grounds for Hatfield and McCoys. Imagine if you allied with a nation and you were granted, 900,000 acres to have 500,000 stolen from you, to wake up one day and see that the local municipality was granting building permits on disputed territories within your communities. And, again, as a city councilor, every municipality across the country has within our planning acts here in Canada places to grow, ways in which the urban boundary can expand so more people can move to municipalities. Every single municipality, every single community in this country has that, except for First Nations communities whose lands are constantly being dispossessed.
That's really good of you to get involved in that. Was that prominent, would you say, an issue to the NDP? Is it something they've been prioritizing as a party?
I mean, look, we'll call it what it is. Mm-hmm. We're a regional party that has regional differences under a federal umbrella. Mm-hmm. And so I think the party is founded going back to the CCF and labor here in Canada on these theories of justice, right? Like if you look back at Stanley Knowles' New Party, what he's talking about there is a kind of a social gospel that talked about equality and talked about justice and talked about all of these things. I think it's within the fabric of our party. However, it is also true that while we might have it in our language, there are instances in which we just don't live up to the promise of true nation-to-nation reconciliation. And of course, you don't have to look any farther than BC to see lethal overwatch on Wet'suwet'en under Horrigan to know that to be true, right? And we're all guilty, right? Like, so this is the thing. Like, I'm not here as a purist. I'm not here as a perfect politician. We are all colonial settlers that are responsible for the covenants of the treaties with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. And we all fail, right? Which is not an absolution, but I think that it needs to become a much greater priority if we are to be who we hope to be. Yeah,
aspire to be. That would be a good segue into the convention, because the NDP just had a pretty significant convention. What are your thoughts? How do you feel? Are you overjoyed at things, horrified at others? What's the review?
I have found that these convention models are also antiquated in the way that they delegate and broker power. And it comes from a time that's an honest institution where people would go to arenas, quite literally, that would have a limited capacity of 1,000 or 2,000 people. And you'd fill a bar and you'd fill an arena, whatever the case may be. And so in order to have a representative democracy, you would delegate authority to people, whether through EDAs or through labor or through, regional caucuses. That model is not necessary anymore now that we're online. Nor do I think the ways in which we engage with policy resolutions are democratic, nor are they generative and congruent with the values that we have. That it's often the case that people are engaging in these debates in very temporary ways and in very adversarial ways that leave people leaving these debates feeling dehumanized. And I say that, referencing Brian Chang's last call for an emergency resolution against anti-Asian hate. And here's a community that has been under significant violent attack. And his request was that we name the thing of white terrorism against all peoples of color, but specifically with specificity Asian Canadians. And people within the party took it upon themselves to turn it into a process of points of order and amendments. And it's a place in which whiteness weaponizes procedure to keep out a lot of marginalized and equity-seeking communities. I've experienced it, right? I went to go speak in 2018 about carding, and I can remember while I'm at the front of the mic, right when I'm about to speak, somebody wants to jump in on a point of order so they can insert themselves. And so I say all that to say this, that I think that there are new ways in which the party should be engaging with policy discussions that should engage all membership. One member, one vote. This radical idea that every single member deserves to have a stake in the party and allows for a process that can take the time that's necessary to have the kind of generative discussions around really important issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really important that you bring that up, though. Like, that's something that needs to be talked about more and isn't really. Like, I think you're the first person I've talked to who's like, oh yeah, there's a big problem with, like, you know, the white supremacy seeps into that political process as well. You know, like it's in there as well. What were some of the specific, I guess, resolutions that you were either happy or upset at?
Yeah, I mean, like, so I mean, I didn't attend convention because I have challenges with the process, and I had challenges validating a process which I didn't feel fully respected the entirety of our membership, or even like respected the staff who were involved. Like, there was a lot of really malicious and toxic behavior, right, that happens in these places, and I just wasn't down for it. But I will say that you know, my political philosophy is about centering the voices who are most impacted by the things in which we're trying to champion. And so, going back to this idea of whiteness and the left, when I'm seeing these debates that often become very vitriolic around, you know, Palestine, Israel, all of these things, I want to see like who's actually organizing around these particular issues. And on this particular issue of the Palestinian resolution, which was Palestinian led, and a very important thing, which is often erased, led by many local progressive Jewish voices who wanted to overcome our party's reluctance to adequately and maturely deal with this discussion. Most often the case, it's been procedurally left out of a vote, or our positions haven't reflected perhaps the membership. And so I think that this time it did in a very overwhelming way, that we all agreed as a party that we should be supporting a resolution that calls for the upholding of international law.
Yeah, I know. It's not even that controversial. It's like, should be the bare minimum, you would think, right? Like,
yeah. And, you know, we certainly came under a lot of criticism. I think that there's generally a fear on the left of getting Corbyned by this issue, where you are,
it's a verb now.
Painted,
it's
right?
Totally a verb.
Yeah, I mean, I came out against the IRA definition and immediately was called anti-Semitic. Wow. I've seen it happen in real time. But I also know that under Netanyahu, under the nation state laws, under the threat of annexation, under the expansion of illegal settlements, under the brutal occupation and over-incarceration of young people, elders, women, people on the front lines, the violence that is happening on those front lines demands a moral clarity, right? And so I think we got that in a very substantive way. It was overwhelmingly supported. And there's some really solid policies that are coming out, and people really care about the issues that matter to them in their communities. But I'll say this, that we have some of the best and brightest thinkers in the country within our party ranks. Mm-hmm. And I think we still sometimes fail to adequately tell the stories that connect with people in meaningful ways, right? That mobilize them into action.
Yeah, that's fair. What about the resolution to, like, this one was, I guess, advertised and got everyone really excited, especially on the left, to tax billionaires with a tax rate of 100% above $1 billion. When I heard that, I was like, well, yeah, that one also just makes sense on the surface. You know, to me, it's just like, yeah, like who needs more than $999 million either in assets or just in cars or jewels or in Elon Musk rockets? I don't know, or Dogecoin, whatever it is. Like, who needs that much wealth? Yeah, like can't you max out at a certain? Can't your character max out? You know, isn't there a limit to how much you need to amass?
There is no marginal utility of greed. It is like this so-called free market, which is infinite expansion, and there's infinite expansion of greed. And you only have to reference the $78 billion that the ultra wealthiest in our country accumulated during the course of COVID. That they have $78 billion more now than they did before the world's greatest economic upheaval is everything you need to know about the inequality in our tax laws. It is obscene. And for every dollar that somebody accumulates that they did not work for is a dollar stolen from somebody who did. And that is precisely what has been happening here. So, no, bro, you get me fired up. So
it's true though. That's the shit that pisses me off, because like the NDP was the only party that came forward, and they didn't ask for a lot. I think Jagmeet Singh wanted something. You probably know the number better off the top of your head. It was like, if you have over X amount of dollars, we will tax you at like 1%, which it seems
1% like over 20 million.
That's it.
That was the original flat tax.
Yeah.
What I see now though is a huge appetite for a progressive wealth tax. What the Liberals just put out in their budget, the yacht tax, the luxury car tax, represents 1 cent of every dollar of a true wealth tax. Our modest wealth tax, which I think as an opening salvo was interesting that they wouldn't even support that. And it was a meager 1% over $20 million of wealth.
To directly pay for COVID-related emergency equipment, relief for families, rent, shit like that.
Absolutely.
I was like this, it just makes sense, right? This should be enormously politically popular because it's very popular with the Canadian public. Like, that's what they want.
A super majority of the Canadian public are so down for a wealth tax and so fed up with the 87 families in this country who have more wealth than the bottom 12 million Canadians. Let that sink in. 87 families in this country have acquired more wealth than the bottom earning 12 million Canadians. That is a fucking obscenity.
Yeah. I mean, it's a rich country club, 87. When it comes to passing a resolution or even a progressive tax that directly impacts both, the wealthiest Canadians and corporations too, right? Because there was a number of things. Before I get into that, is there anything else like that that's going to be on the table, do you know, in the future? Is that something coming up? I know both the NDP and the Liberals are talking about UBI now, which actually gets me very excited. If it's
very different.
Yes.
Very different.
You can point out the
I want to make sure we're clear.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we're clear on this.
Yeah.
Liberals want to study a universal basic income. And when the Liberals studied a universal basic income in my city, because they did it provincially first in Ontario, they still legislated people into poverty. They gave them an amount that they knew to be below the low income cutoff. So when they say basic, they mean hella basic. What they don't account for is the increase in astronomical costs in rent, in food, in electricity, in utilities, in internet fees, because the fees are too damn high. They don't account for any of that. What we have called for, what my seatmate and my sister Leah Gazan had called for in Motion 46 was a guaranteed basic livable income. And we can never take our eyes off the prize with livable, because a UBI, one of the reasons why UBI is supported by many conservatives is because they want to use that as a way to eliminate and eradicate social spending in other places. They want to basically say, we're providing you with the UBI, therefore, we don't have to have social housing. Therefore, we don't have to have access to food. Therefore, we don't have to have...
The old Andrew Yang, basically.
All of it. All that yang gang bullshit. Yeah. So a guaranteed basic livable income acknowledges that this needs to be supplementary to all of the other things. And, I'll share with you that when this government makes an announcement, when you look at all the money that went out during COVID, it goes back to the old adage, don't tell me about your politics, show me your budget. Time and time again, they left out people with disabilities. Why? Because Liberals weigh people based on their contribution to the GDP. And if you don't contribute, they don't give a shit about you reference students, seniors, and people with disabilities. So what do they do in this budget today? They come out with this idea that they are going to study a disability tax benefit and give $12 million over the course of 3 years. During the actual pandemic, when the country is burning around us, people are dying, people with disabilities are dying in long-term care, they gave them nothing. They gave them this paltry $600 one-time payment to 40% of the population. People with disabilities demand more, and a guaranteed basic livable income would help provide them that. So we called for, as a first step, a guaranteed basic livable income for people with disabilities to the amount of at the bare minimum, $2,200 a month, right? That they would just get to help, with their basic necessities of life.
Oh yeah, no, that sounds completely reasonable too. Like that's, I think also it seems like one of those things that in the long term will actually benefit the country, like economically, even from a capitalist standpoint. You can look at UBI and be like, it actually has a net benefit to give the poorest amongst you purchasing power. Like they are going to spend that money on everything, right? It's a boon to the economy if you tax the richest amongst you who are already doing okay, as you pointed out, and then put that back into the poorest Canadians, basically.
Yeah, it also we can't talk about that without talking about the way in which we tax corporations. We have some of the lowest corporate taxes, in the G7, in the way that if you look at what Biden is talking about, like if you're in Canada and fucking Joe Biden is outflanking you on tax policy, there's a problem.
Yeah.
Right? We have this maple wash version of what it means to be progressive in Canada, and we have spent far too many years looking down our nose and snickering at what happens in the dumpster fire of the United States, that now Biden is coming out and outflanking us. We got a liberal government who refuses to tax the wealthy. They refuse to tax capital gains. So when we talk about things like a universal basic income, the caveat must always be that we're not forcing the appreciation of the cost of living, that we have to invest in a national housing strategy that builds purpose-built units of affordability based on people's ability to pay and not what the average market rent is, which is the liberal dogma. Mm-hmm. They're saying that if it's 80% of the average market rent, and that's deeply affordable, but what they're not saying is they're pegging affordability at actually sometimes 125% of the market rate. So they are forcing appreciation of the housing market. And there's a whole bunch more in the way they financialize it through the Bank of Canada, where they use monetary theory to basically borrow money into existence to give to banks so that this next generation can lend way more money than they can pay back to buy houses that are artificially inflated.
How do we stop that? And also, I love how MMT applies to Canadians as it does Americans. It's just you switch out the Federal Reserve for the Bank of Canada, and it's the same old bait and switch, just printing money out of fiat currency.
Well, I have this beautiful privilege, this parliamentary privilege. I'm on this little-known committee called Public Accounts. And in Public Accounts, what we do is we deal with the Auditor General's reports. We deal with the Parliamentary Budget Officer's reports. And there was a report on student debt that came back. And it was like $33 billion they had to write off on student debt. And, it seemed like a lot of money. So I put the question, because I just, I referenced how we've bailed out big banks here. We did quantitative easing in Canada by providing $750 billion, capital B, billion dollars in liquidity supports to Bay Street. And we did that through a program called the Paper Buyback Program through the Bank of Canada, where they bought this debt and allowed banks to lend out low interest money on a fractional reserve system to borrow money into existence to allow people to continue to fan the flames of the housing market and the construction market, right? Like the construction industry is the only one that didn't shut down throughout all of COVID. They're continuing to build.
Yeah, I mean, you could parlay that right into talking about Doug Ford, right? Because isn't that
hell yeah?
Hasn't that been at the heart of the whole Doug Ford issue? We were watching like some Doug Ford supercuts, but the crux being that he's more interested in increasing police power and basically creating a police state in Ontario than he is at actually helping Ontarians, and so that he can basically keep construction open, right? Like that's been the one thing he's been fine with, construction being open, meatpacking plants being open, places where there is like, you know, very big concentrations of COVID, and now he's going to like put the onus onto the people basically.
There is a criminal negligence in the way that political decisions have superseded evidence-based public health policy in Canada. In Canada, we had, I think it might have been asbestos or mining, a law that's called the Westray Law, which basically was meant to hold corporations accountable for criminal negligence leading to injury or death. And in theory, it was a great law. It's very rarely applied. But I've actually asked the Liberal government if they would consider applying the Westray Law to the meatpacking plants, the long-term care facilities, and all the other corporations who refuse to provide critical PPEs, who refuse to provide the kind of sick days off and healthcare and staffing to curb this thing. We're in a third wave with rates that are surpassing the United States of America. And so it is a crisis, and people are absolutely going to die based on these horrific decisions. And I would state that seeing the numbers that I've seen, again, being in this close proximity to the misery that COVID has caused, as an elected official, I'm committed to exploring ways in which public officials would be held accountable in a post-mortem of this pandemic, in the same way that we tried to bring greater accountability during Walkerton when there was water poisoning here in Ontario. 20,000 people have died. 80% of those people are connected to long-term care facilities. These are facilities that have been privatized, that received public dollars, and that had the audacity to pay executive bonuses and dividends. If that doesn't make you outraged, I don't know what will.
Yeah, that's one part of like how obscenely like messed up it's been. How much is Doug Ford like himself personally responsible? Is it the Doug Ford administration, and is it as like transparent as that? We were reading the article by Cristo A. Vallis not too long ago, and it really paints that picture where it just really seems like he was more interested in gutting every social spending program possible that he can get his hands on, while at the same time using this to expand police power.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the police power was a last grip. And, like, make no mistakes about it, Doug Ford won in 2018 without a platform. If you want to see the Conservative Party's platform, you just have to look at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. They had a blue book that they put out. Many of you will remember from Ontario, Rocco Rossi, I believe it was Rocco Rossi, who, on the eve of the brutal cuts of a Doug Ford government says, basically, let them eat cake. He was at this big gala with champagne, and he was just like, let them eat cake. This is the head of the Chamber of Commerce for Ontario. And the attacks on workers' rights, the attacks on environmental regulations, the attacks on our rural and agricultural sector by virtue of expanding into the green belt for the purpose of developments. There's the joke that the Doug Ford government is like 4 developers in a trench coat. Or maybe that was Trudeau with 4 oil executives in a trench coat. But it applies, right? Where you only have to look at the Mattamy Homes, all the big people who created Ontario proud, which then became Canada proud, which then became the Conservative government of Canada's machine, are making the calls. And there's elements of dark money. There's elements of significant corporate interest. And it continues to play out. This last time, though, when he called for the extended police powers, what he did was just extend to the rest of Ontario what Black and Indigenous and low-income people have been experiencing in this province for, probably 25, 30 years.
True.
So all these people who are taken to the streets on lockdowns and civil liberties are the same people who told Black people, to shut the F up when we were talking about dismantling street checks and racial profiling and carding.
Which is
And
funny
so
because now
there's
the conservative, like even conservative media pundits and figures, both in Canada and ones watching, they're all running with this now, being like, "This is fascist! Oh my god, fascist government!" Like the American ones who are saying that, like I won't list their names, but I've written back to them like, "This is a conservative government, just so you know." But if you didn't know that, now you do. But also, like this seems to be one of the worst responses I could possibly imagine to a crisis of this nature, especially from a political standpoint. It's not popular, right? Like it's backfiring enormously, is what I've read.
He is incredibly incompetent, and he couples his incompetence with really malicious intent. And I only have to say that because when they were rolling out the vaccines in Ontario, they actually did diagrams that showed where the hotspots were and what should be priority based on his own provincial vaccine task force, and they overlaid that with ridings. And it just so happens that the ridings that they prioritized, these conservative ridings, were not hotspots. They left out in the first phase of the pharmacy rollout for vaccines. My entire riding got left out that has the third lowest household income in the country, that has some of the highest infection rates, some of the highest mortality rates, and they completely left it out. And there is language around that. It is not hyperbole to say that this is social murder. These decisions that are being made must be accounted for using legal frameworks in the future that will investigate and hopefully prosecute, the malicious intents of these governments that have been wholly unprepared. Right-wing populism is a crash and collision course with COVID for the perfect storm of incompetence.
Brazil, India, America. Like there's a pattern. Like, right-wing, far-right authoritarian governments, and also just that idea of like personal responsibility, individuality, all this kind of stuff. You don't need social safety nets. You don't need provisions. You don't need the government helping you with rent. Like, what is that? Communism? Is this China? What is this Russia? It's been so sad to see over the course of what. Like Ontario, you're getting it the worst now, right? Like I always feel bad looking at the stats.
Alberta's pretty bad too. I think Alberta might even be worse. And you know what? But so is BC.
Case in point. Yeah.
So is BC, and
BC's
bad too.
But I can explain BC. BC by an NDP government, no less. I think a lot of it has to do with Whistler. And that's one of the things that John Horgan hasn't spoken out about. But that's where the epicenter is in this province right now. It's in Whistler. Whistler workers, the frontline workers in Whistler, all are forced to live in very small, I have friends who used to work in Whistler, right? I've been inside them before. They're very small, close-knit, cubby, like bunk bed style places where people come from Australia, where they come from Europe, and they come to work there in Whistler. So you've got thousands and thousands of people closely contained. The Brazilian variant is introduced, and all of a sudden it spreads, and it's gotten so bad in that area alone. And the reason was money. John Horgan, he wanted to have tourism come in. He wanted that's a massive tourist trap, and that was one of the things. So much tourism was coming into BC. We had restaurants where you could eat, things like that. I was considered this little oasis, and now it's completely and utterly fucked.
I feel like, and I said this before, that we haven't even begun to grip the magnitude of the kind of societal grieving that is going to happen when we look back on the decisions that were made and the moral bankruptcy of this idea of balancing human lives with the economy. It is one of the greatest atrocities of modern Western civilization that decisions were made when we totally had the ability to pay people to stay home, to legislate banks to stop on mortgage payments. We had the ability to do that. We could have said there's going to be a freeze on residential rent, commercial rent, a pause on the economy, right? In order that people might live. And I don't know what the cost is going to be when we weigh this out at the end, when the final death tally comes, and we do what was the cost of that human life? But I hope that we still have enough humanity as a society where it'll be enough to make us promise to never do this again.
Or change.
We must change.
Yeah.
We must change because we know it to be true that this is only the beginning. We knew this after SARS. We had systems in place that were supposed to protect us. We had emergency strategic stockpiles that were supposed to be ready. We had systems that were supposed to alert us all of these things failed and decisions were made to pass responsibility to somebody else. That the federal government didn't invoke the Emergency Act or an interim order under the Department of Health Act to step in and to ensure that paid sick days happened, to roll out vaccines across the country like Biden did. I am not a Biden guy. Let me be very clear, right? Like by any stretch of the imagination. But when I see what they did in California with Gavin Newsom and open up arenas and just do max vaccination for everybody, you know, I can't help but ask myself, like, if we're not going to respond as a federal government in this moment of crisis now, what's the fucking point of having a federal government? Mm-hmm. So we could say what? That we bought vaccines? Where's the responsibility of making sure that they get into the arms of Canadians? Where's the responsibility to make sure that the paid sick days happen so people can stay home? Where's the responsibility to provide people with an adequate livable income to ride this storm out when there were actual policy discussions in the Department of Finance that balanced the right amount, the perfect equilibrium of incentives for people to work in the middle of a fucking pandemic with what they would basically need to just survive. That kind of calculus was had in the back halls of our Canadian government, and I think that it's an atrocity.
They probably got your number there. They probably knew well ahead of time. I'm guessing there was an estimate. It was probably like, what was the human cost of this? And then they're like, okay, we'll scale that up a little bit. What if we opened up X amount? How many bodies are we talking? Okay, that's doable. That's doable. I can handle that. Oh, I'm not. It's
wild. It's like a
conspiracy theory on you, but
I mean, like, there's a certain actuarial approach to this stuff. Mm-hmm. These are the best and the brightest people in the country who are at these tables and making these decisions. And my underlying point is that in a capitalist society, that this was a consideration. Yeah, it tells you everything you need to know about capitalism. The fact that private pharmaceutical companies who have been funded by public institutions in research, who have been funded by innovation and development dollars, who have been funded by wage subsidies, then sell us back for the public good these vaccines. They have decided where these vaccines go. That there is a COVID apartheid that is here, where the global South has been completely left out through their inability to pay and purchase for these things. Sure. And one of the most criminal aspects of this is even the World Health Organization had the ability, if there was consensus, to waive the intellectual property to allow that this science be shared around the world.
Yeah.
Right? It's called a TRIPS waiver. And both the United States and Canada has refused to support a TRIPS waiver so that countries like India and Brazil and others can produce their own vaccines and we can get mass inoculation happening. Without mass inoculation, count on the fourth wave, the fifth wave, count on variants that we haven't even seen yet.
Yeah. With new scary names too. It's like, what is it? Double mutation in India. I was like, double mutation. That's 2 times the mutations. I don't even know what to think anymore. Yeah. That sounds terrible. All right. How about since I'm getting close to the end of the show, we end with some hopium, because I think we've gone real dark. We've gone real dark, Matthew. But it's important.
Hey, look, anger is a great currency.
I agree.
You know what I mean? But
I agree.
So I just want to validate everybody's anger and anxiety that is out there. We can't let it turn into inertia. There has been, despite all odds, the movement for Black Lives, Fridays for the Future, leftist organizing in ways that are significant, although I can do without the sectarian bullshit. And I think that we have this moment right now where power has been destabilized, where the average person in this country who might not have been able to imagine an alternative economy, a more democratic economy, can now imagine that in meaningful ways. So I am elated by what I have seen in terms of people that otherwise would have just gone about their daily business, taking a real critical look at what's happening. I'm still petrified of right-wing populism. We are in a populist moment. People are seeking for answers because there's a vacuum of leadership. It is now incumbent on us, and when I mean us, I mean all of us, to organize where we're at, have critical conversations with our friends and our neighbors, to talk about what is fair and what is just in ways that apply to everybody and not just our own self-interest. And we need to demand more from our public elected officials. from our governments. We need to demand more from our economy and the corporations that are siphoning off money from, working class people through surplus value. And the fact that we're like on this talk right now, having this conversation, reaching people that are out there on this medium and this platform is a beautiful thing. 5 years ago, you think the fucking Globe and Mail is going to run this story? You think they're going to be talking about this stuff in the National Post? No. Yeah. But here we are.
Yeah.
And, I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to join you. I watch the work that you do and the way that you engage and just the consistency in the platform that you're building. And, I appreciate it. I think that this is the future.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate your politics. You're like one of the few people who makes tweets where I'm like, holy shit, that's based. I was like, you want the extra? Well, because like it's usually people like to, especially professional politicians and the ones I've spoken to in the NDP, they have to soften their messaging, right? Because that's politics. So like I can't say like abolish the police lands, okay? I can't say defund the police either. What I can say is that we should reappropriate money that has been spent on the police in another way. And that, fair enough, the game is the game. I understand it. It's got to be played. It's got to be played. But then I'll see you take a tweet that's just straight up like, land back, boom. And you're like, well, yeah, I mean, he's calling it like it is.
I think what people are begging for is honesty. They want authenticity. And I'll, like without going real dark, but I'll say, they got what they got out of Donald Trump. He was never fooling anybody. Doug Ford, Rob Ford before him, Rob Ford, the original Donald Trump before him, right? The mayor of one of the most progressive cities in the country, was authentic. Mm-hmm. We sometimes lack our authenticity by using this outdated model of real shiny messaging. I have the deep privilege and honor of being from Hamilton Center, where if I get too cute by stuff, my people right here in my community will call bullshit in a minute. And they're outraged. And if they saw me being cute, when I see other politicians being cute with the high fives, the backslapping, what it tells me is they're not actually in proximity to misery, that they're not seeing the suffering of their communities. Because if they saw that shit, they'd cut it out and they'd get real with people.
Fuck, that's powerful. Let's plug you so more people can find you and the shit you do. What's your socials?
Yeah, man, I keep it spicy. I keep it spicy on
if you want my spicy
Green
tweets.
NDP. Yeah, Matthew Green NDP, and I'm trying different all the different platforms. My commitment is to connect people to the process of Parliament. So I run an ongoing series called Parle to the People, Parliament to the People. If you're a Francais out there, we throw in a little something for the Quebecois folks. Any of those newfound friends that I made in the last couple of weeks. And I just invite you all to engage me in the discussion. We don't always have to agree with things. I recognize that there'll be people, that are maybe further left than me in whatever politic that they have who don't think I'm going far enough. That's great. Continue to push, continue to organize in your community. But also I'll say this, recognize that if you're not moving people into mobilization and action where you live and where you're actually at, that a lot of the energies that are out there right now in the outrage are just that, right? So we need to turn outrage into action in this moment and mobilize people for some real substantive social shifts.
Fuck yeah. And are you going to join Among Us whenever we get it working together?
I'm in.
All right,
I'm in.
sweet.
Bro, I have a whole system here, but I got to call IT, man. They got a free Discord.
Yeah, that would be dope. Oh, man. Matthew, thank you so much. That was awesome to talk to you.
I really appreciate you for having me.
All right, cheers.
Hey, do you like movies? Do you like Serfs? Do you want movies and Serfs watching the movies? So then come over to the new channels. It's the Serfs Cinema. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Can you do the thing, that thumbs up and comment and all those things that help us out in the algorithm that controls every aspect of our lives? Also, if you happen to have a Facebook account, can you delete it? Just delete it. You should probably delete your Facebook account because it's not a great company. But hey, if you can't do that for whatever reason, I understand. And could you also go to facebook.com/thesurftimes then and give us a little like and a follow. We're just trying to push back against the fact that people like Ben Shapiro happen to dominate the platform entirely.
And when everyone asks why do older generations believe the things they believe, one of the problems is the majority of them on social media use Facebook. So to counter that, we're just going to be on there too now. Also, if you happen to have a union or a worker co-op or even a leftist project, podcast, website, Zoom, MySpace, it doesn't matter. We will advertise it for free on this channel. All you got to do is go to weareserfs.com and use the forms that we got there, weareserfs.com. Thanks, everybody.
To our gods, I'm Raft and Xander Corvus. We shall build golden idols in your honor. To our monarch, Tom Spiker. Our soft, spongy flesh is yours to command. To our lords, Evan Nudie, Trevor R., Alexander Thaler, Ryan Lubin, Bisexual Black Gamer, Toe Fox, and Jeffrey Lamb, we proudly carry your sigils onto the battlefield. And to our Knights of the Round Table, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, Multimondi, Timothy Hart, Trevor Janis, Lemmy 101, Anthropophagic, Saren 42, Chronic to Hemphog, Callie Kotka, The Great Pudini, Von Janny, Catherine, Radical Maniac, Ramon Acosta, Encosin, J. Fraser Cartwright, Jimmy Bignuts, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Political Puppy, Andreas Chiringuito, Zach Christensen, Nicholas Marks, Jopi, Josh Mickelson, Melissa Murphy, Todd Buckingham, Todd Lajeunesse, and Constance Joyce Lacheris. We tip our cap and lift our mug and salute you.